Fulfilling the law. As Christ followers, we are to reflect the law's requirements by loving one another. Here's Gene to explain.
Now, Jesus has just outlined the Beatitudes, a powerful profile, first of all, for leaders, but certainly for every member of a follower of Jesus Christ. And Jesus made two powerful statements following the Beatitudes. He said, in chapter 5, verse 13, "You are the salt of the earth." Now keep in mind, he's sitting there probably on that rock, looking at these 12 men first and foremost. Others are probably listening in, straining to hear what he's saying, because he's just talking probably. He's not shouting. He's simply talking to these men. You are the salt of the earth. You are the light of the world. Now, the word for you, the pronoun is plural. So he's clearly speaking to these men as a group, as a community. And what Jesus is in the process of doing here is equipping these men as a community that are going to be able to penetrate the darkness of this world. And so he says, you are the salt of the earth, you're the light of the world. Now, first of all, what he is doing is he's contrasting them with the other religious leaders who are not salt and who are not light. He transitions on and he says, now, in essence, I want you to understand something. I don't want you to misunderstand, if you put it in the negative. I've called this Christ fulfills the law. So Jesus said to these men, don't assume that I came to destroy the law or the prophets. In essence, he's saying, you're going to hear me say some things that sounds like I am trying to destroy the law. Because he's going to confront these religious leaders who wanted to cross every T and dot every I in terms of the law. And he said, I don't want you to misunderstand. I did not come to destroy, but to fulfill the law. For I assure you, until heaven and earth pass away, not the smallest letter, or one stroke of a letter, the jot and tittles in Hebrew, will pass from the law until all things are accomplished. He goes on to say, therefore, men, whoever breaks one of the least of these commands and teaches people to do so will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. I don't want you to go out and start teaching to violate the law. But whoever, he says, practices and teaches these commands will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. Now think for a moment what Jesus had just said. The fact is that these men will not understand this until at least 3 years later. When Jesus is in the upper room, having the Passover meal in Jerusalem, in a little short period of time, he's going to be nailed to the cross. He's going to die for the sins of the world. And it was there that he broke bread with these men and he had the Passover meal and told them, this is my body, which is broken for you. This is my blood, which is shed. And in the process, he washed their feet and he served them. And after he had done that, he said this. And it correlates with what he said 3 years before, at least on the Mount of Beatitudes. I give you a new command or a new commandment. Men, you may not remember, but about 3 years ago up on that mountain, I told you I did not come to destroy the law. I came to fulfill it. He said, how did I do that? How am I going to do that? How can you do that? Well, I give you a new commandment. Love one another. Just as I've loved you, you must also love one another. He had just washed their feet and served them, but it was symbolic of the fact he was going to die for them. And later, John the Apostle wrote, many years later, this is how we know what love is. Jesus laid down his life for us, and we should lay down our lives for one another. That's what Jesus was teaching. And then Jesus said, by this all people will know that you are my disciples if you have love for one another. You see, Jesus was simply saying there on the Mount of Beatitudes, I've come to fulfill the law. I'm going to keep it perfectly. No one can keep it perfectly, but I'm going to keep it perfectly, and I'm going to die for the sins of the world as the perfect Lamb of God. I'm going to fulfill the law. And how can you fulfill the law? By loving one another, because all of the commandments, all 10 commandments are summarized with one statement. Love your neighbor. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, and your neighbor as yourself. Love is a fulfillment of the law. So Jesus is preparing them, laying the groundwork. It's going to take them a long time to understand it, but Jesus is going to demonstrate that when he dies on the cross. And then, as you remember, he left the upper room, and he was walking towards the Kidron Valley, and he prayed in the presence of these men as he was walking. Perhaps he stopped. He's looking to heaven, and he says, in the darkness, I pray not only for these, that is, these men, but also for those who believe in me through their message. That's us. That's how we've come to faith. Jesus prayed for us. May they all be one, as you, Father, are in me, and I'm in you. May they also be one in us, so the world may believe that you have sent me. What was one of the Beatitudes? Blessed are the peacemakers. Blessed are the peacemakers. And there's only one that can bring peace with God, and the peace of God, and the peace among those of us who are followers of Jesus Christ. So here's the reflection and response question. How do Paul's words in Romans verify our responsibility to fulfill the law of love? Well, Paul really spelled it out. And this is what he said. Do not owe anyone anything except to love one another. Sounds familiar, right? That's what Jesus said. I give you a new command. Love one another. And then Paul goes on to explain. For the one who loves another has what? Fulfilled the law. And to make sure the readers don't misunderstand, he said this. The commandments. Do not commit adultery. Do not murder. Do not steal. Do not covet. Whatever other commandment, all are summed up by this. Love your neighbor as yourself. See, Jesus, when he said, I give you a new command, he's talking about the law of love that will fulfill all of those 10 commandments. Not perfectly, but more and more we can reflect these qualities in our lives because of the transformation that takes place in us through Jesus Christ. And so he goes on to say, love does no wrong to a neighbor. Love, therefore, is what? Fulfillment of the law. So Jesus there on the mountain is preparing them for what is to come in relationship to the way in which they will be able to fulfill the law with the way they lived their lives. So here's the principle to live by. As Christ followers, we're to reflect the law's requirements by loving one another.